get more from Washington and speak to Democratic Representative Jake Auchincloss. Very good evening to you. Certainly a real day of reflection there in Washington. But paint the scene for us, if you can, about your personal experience that day. There you were, just 3 days into the job, having just been elected. What did you see here? Where were you? And how quickly did you realise there was something wrong?
Good evening, and thanks for having me on. As you say, a somber day here in Washington as we commemorate the one-year anniversary of the insurrection. It was my third day in office a year ago. The day before, I'd been touring the Capitol with my father and reflecting on the gravity of the institution. And the day of the 6th, when I first knew something was seriously wrong, was when the cordon of Capitol Police at the perimeter of the building started to stagger. I was in the Marine Corps for a number of years before coming to Congress and trained in crowd control tactics. And I know that when a cordon begins to stagger, it's going to break because people can get in between the police officers and get behind them. And when I saw it stagger, I knew the crowd was going to turn from ugly to violent. And that was really a heart palpitating moment. Unfortunately, it went downhill from there. And I can recall standing on the House floor that night on broken glass, surrounded by National Guardsmen and women with assault weapons, as we voted to certify the election results. Your previous guest, the National Security Advisor, the former National Security Advisor, is right that it was a heinous day. He's wrong that the system worked as it was supposed to. The system is not supposed to work this way. The bulwark of a democracy is the peaceful transfer of power. And as Joe Biden said this morning, you can't only love your country when you win. Losers need to peacefully accede to the winner. And that was violated a year ago. It undercut the integrity of our democracy. And we are still in the midst of this constitutional crisis. This is not a historical event. This is a current event.
Well, why do you think Donald Trump did not intervene for so long?
I think a number of things. One is, as Mr. Bolton said, he rarely has a plan 15 minutes in advance of anything he says. So I think he's just baseline incompetent and unable to plan or project forward. And number two, complete megalomaniac and narcissist who liked the idea of people rioting on his behalf. This is an individual who has never once in his life put anything above his own self-interest, and we should not have expected him to do so on January 6th, and we should certainly not expect him to do so in the future.
I mean, lots of lessons need to be learned. Just want to ask you one, in the context really of you being a former Marine, lots of people there were veterans. Now, why would they feel it necessary to idolise Donald Trump in such a fashion, to go and, break the rules of law by breaking into this building?
January 6th was the cresting of years of dis and misinformation, of polarization born of media that has come to profit off of an outrage as a service model, of elected officials who have thrown red meat to their base instead of trying to solve problems with one another. It was a culmination of a lot of different cancers within the body politic. And some of them we know how to excise. So first and foremost, Donald Trump. This is a uniquely unfit individual for the presidency and must never be allowed to hold power again. But also shoring up the separation of powers and the checks and balances that our framers left us. And we have a bill in Congress to do that, the Protecting Our Democracy Act. We need to pass that bill. Guaranteeing access to the ballot box, pushing back on partisan gerrymandering, getting dark money out of politics. We got a bill to do those things too. The Freedom to Vote Act, we got to pass that bill in Congress. So as we commemorate this one-year anniversary, it must not be a day solely of reflection, but a day of action. We need to pass the laws that can prevent this from occurring.
Well, when you say that, you say Donald Trump should never be allowed to hold power again. That's not in your gift, is it? I mean, there's still a real prospect for 2024, is there not, that he could be the nominee for the Republican Party?
Well, it would have been. When we impeached him in the House after the insurrection, had he been convicted in the Senate, he would have been precluded from holding office. And we still have the 14th Amendment, Section 3. That section states that if you swear an oath to the Constitution and then incite insurrection against the U.S. government, you're unfit to hold office in the future. We can levy that amendment against him to bar him from holding office. These are going to be controversial moves to take, for sure. And yet we've got to account for the clear and present danger to our constitutional republic that he represents and continues to represent.
In terms of the errors that were made that night, why did it take 4 hours to secure the Capitol? Why, when it was quite clear what was happening in pictures, broadcast for several hours, the predicted march on the Hill, the stated aims of some of the participants, why was it so poorly defended?
I think there's no question that there were both intelligence and tactical failures emanating from leadership of Capitol Police through some of the federal and state intelligence agencies to coordinate. To be candid, though, I find those to be the less compelling points of investigation than the broader systemic issues of how we got to an insurrectionist mob outside of the Capitol in the first place. Part of the reason that January 6th was allowed to happen, as you state, is that it was unimaginable in America ahead of that date that this could ever happen. And what went from unimaginable to inexorable needs to be the true cause for investigation. How did we get here as a democracy?
And yet there are still large numbers of people in America who think Joe Biden didn't win. It's a form of dysfunctional democracy. And what message does that send to the world, really, as the US wants to hold autocrats to account, that you can't persuade your own people that you held a lawful election?
70% of Republican voters, to a certain extent, believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. And as you say, it is harder for us to be a beacon of democracy and for us to exert moral leadership on the world stage, especially in an era when we're competing against the Chinese Communist Party, which ideologically is not committed to free and fair elections, when we ourselves cannot guarantee the peaceful transfer of power through those free and fair elections. So as we defend democracy abroad, that work begins at home.
And just very quickly, I was on that night. The pictures available subsequently from inside and from those pressure points you talked about, you know, the windows being broken into, the doors, the corridors, where there was literally a battle, was there not, with law enforcement officials and the protesters. Many of your colleagues have said they really thought they were going to die that night. Did that cross your mind? Is that the mood in the building?
I was barricaded in my office. I never feared for my own physical safety. But then again, people weren't calling my name, hunting me down the hallways as they were for some of my colleagues.
Well, Jake Auchincloss, good to have your thoughts. Thank you very much indeed there. US Congress representatives from Massachusetts.